Coming to you from our opulent and luxurious 4x8 refurbished room closet at the national headquarters in Indianapolis. With duct tape, studio lights, and a mic that you barely can hear, we hope to entertain and educate you. This is the Tango Alpha Lima podcast.
They call me crazy cause I'm facing all my giants. They try to scare me into thinking I can fight it. They tell me I should never even think of trying. But that's just me, I'm gonna live out in defiance.
Hello, and welcome back to the Tango Alpha Lima podcast. I'm Mark Seavey, the Special Projects Counsel of the American Legion, coming at you from the American Legion National Headquarters here in Indianapolis. Now, being a 70s kid, I always know that when the phrase "a very special episode" comes up on TV, I'm about to watch Wonder Years or Blossom about teen pregnancy or bullying or something else that's going to make me grow as a person. So I've always kind of hated the quote, "a very special episode," but hopefully we're going to redefine that. We've got a heck of a show. If you're watching this on YouTube, you can see that we've got a few extra faces. We're going to have some fun here. We don't know how long this one's going to go, so you might get one podcast out of this. You might get a two-parter. You might get a three-parter. But I did want to start by noting that I am joined, as always, by Jeff Daly, our intrepid former Marine in Hollywood, California, and a Michigan guy, I might add, and Ashley Garbolja Maldonado, a former MP, a former Ohio person, and now coming at us from Washington, D.C. Guys, welcome. It's good to see you as always.
Good to be here.
Hello. Yes. So our special guest today, and we're going to get to them right now, is three prominent Legionnaires who have all served in law enforcement and who have a sort of boots on the ground view of what's happening in the country right now with regard to race relations, the application of constitutional rights in the form of the protests that are going on, and unfortunately have also seen a complete breakdown of societal norms when these things turn into riots and other counterproductive behavior. So I want to start by introducing each of these. Our first guest is Autrey James. Autrey, AJ, as he's known, is the past judge advocate for the Department of California, one of the smartest people I know. And I know Jeff and I are founding members of the AJ fan club. So we're excited to have him on. Be sure to send your applications to us when you're ready. Autrey is a 20-year law enforcement officer and investigator and supervisor before switching over to being a trial attorney. And he now serves, if I'm correct here, as the Deputy District Attorney for Alameda County.
That's correct.
Also joining us from California is Hugh Crooks. Hugh, wave at us if you would. There you go. And before I go into his bio, I did want to note that Hugh and I, despite not knowing each other before this, are fellow 11 Bravo 40 infantry sergeants. So we have that in common. Unlike me, however, Hugh felt the need to brag about his good conduct medal, which I did not appreciate at all. But Hugh served 14 months in Vietnam, stretching from 1967 to 69. Again, he came out with his good conduct medal and an air medal, which is incredibly rare for an infantryman. He's a former safety police chief who served 29 and a half years, including during the LA riots after the Rodney King beating came out. He's an American Legion life member. He's served as commander post, district, and area. He was actually the second Afro-American commander from the Department of California in our 100 years. He's state chaplain, former, or are you currently the NEC-man or formerly?
I was the NEC.
Is formerly the NEC-man from the state of California. And in 2017, he was awarded a Lifetime Achievement Award by the Department of California. And last but certainly not least is Sean Powers. Sean, wave at us. There you are. A former New York Police Department officer who was a plainclothes officer in a unit that often was in Harlem and other New York City areas. He served from 82 to 88 in various air cav and medevac units, and was in from 88 to 93 in the inactive reserve. And you've held a variety of positions, I assume, in the Department of New York?
Yes.
Yeah.
And my post alone, I've been the commander since 2004.
Okay, great.
Try to give it up, but they won't.
Nobody else will take it.
No.
So, guys, we're obviously living in some pretty weird times right now. People from coast to coast are locked inside because of the global pandemic. And meanwhile, we have this sort of reevaluation of race relations that's playing out basically in front of our eyes. And in large part, to a trapped audience who's sitting at home watching this. So we wanted to put together a group of people whose perspectives on how this is playing out will help inform our own opinions. Now, we haven't gone into this with any expected outcome. We don't even know how long this podcast is going to be. We didn't do any pre-show interviews or anything else. So we want this to be a natural growth of something and a discussion that we can start here. But guys, I want to welcome you. Thank you so very much for coming today and donating your time to talk to us about this. So we're going to start with you, AJ, but if you could tell us a little bit about where your background helps inform you as to what's happening and what you think about what you're seeing in America right now.
Well, I'll start with what I think about what I'm seeing. I think it is unfortunate that in 2020 that we're still having this conversation, to be quite honest with you. It is something that I had hoped had been, that we would have been able to kind of get past and get resolved many, many years ago, but it hasn't. And that is unfortunate. It is also very unfortunate that there are folks who are using the opportunity brought about by this discussion to go out and burn and loot. That's unacceptable, in my opinion. You know, others may have different opinions about that, but in my opinion, that's absolutely unacceptable. That's not the way to gather, to garner the attention of others. You know, in terms of my background, I kind of grew up a little bit around the country. Originally from Michigan, came to California, spent my summers in New Orleans. So I've got experience of both the Midwest, the West, and the South. And kind of some of the things that have gone along with that. Born in 62. So I've seen, particularly in the South, a number of things that, you know, most people my age who've lived in California have not seen or experienced. So my views are shaped by the experiences that I've had along the way, but those experiences also include positive things. You know, there's a lot of points in my life that I can point to where I could have gone left, but went right. And that was because of the help of other individuals, and those individuals were people of all different races. So I think I have somewhat of a unique perspective in that in some ways I can see both sides of the issues. And I'm willing to share what I see or what I know or my experiences. It's a matter of, are people ready and willing to listen?
Yeah, that's the kind of discussion we're hoping to have here today. Hugh, what's sort of your background and where do you come at this from?
As the senior person in this group, I have seen a number of things. First off, like you said, I was born in Chicago, raised in Los Angeles. I said the only time I ever went to the South was in the military, which was a total eye-opener. In the 60s, you would think all of this was all done. And I'm going to share this real quick with you. I walked into, in my training, went to AIT, and I don't even know, Fort Polk, Louisiana. And the reason I've never gone back to Louisiana since.
That's the worst place in the entire world.
Walked into a bar with some of my fellow soldiers, and the guy looked up and said, "Excuse me, fellas, we don't serve coloreds and Spanish in here. This is 1967. I'm getting ready to go to Vietnam." I was totally shocked. And also, as a chief of a department, I look at it totally different than a lot of the line officers. But I did notice, like I said, when I'm looking at the television and I'm seeing what's going on out there, I see people taking advantage of people that legitimately are protesting. I am very proud of those kids that are protesting. They're doing stuff that, and just like Audrey said, I thought was actually a lot of that stuff was done, but I know it's not. And I have grandsons that I'm concerned with that, you know what, hey, what if they meet that one wrong cop? So yeah, there's a lot of things I'm concerned with out there. And I don't want to see what happened with Rodney King all over again. And I'll say this real quick. I was traumatized by being there because it took me back. I thought I was in the middle of Vietnam again. I looked over the city and I saw fires. I saw black and whites running all over the place, and I saw helicopters. The only thing I didn't see were planes strapping buildings, and it was like, oh my God, what happened?
Yeah.
Mm.
And Sean, I think it's great to have you included in here. Obviously, you're a little paler than your average resident of Harlem.
A
So
little bit, just a little bit.
so and I think it's important to see that side as well. Like how did you work as a plainclothes police officer in Harlem? You were there for quite a long time, so clearly you were respected. How do we bridge that gap, and where do you come at this from?
Well, Harlem right now is very gentrified, so
Mhm.
you could blend in perfectly. As a matter of fact, my sister used to live down there, and so, and again, the same parents, so she had the same complexion. But I was a cop back there in the mid '90s, where the pale complexion it wasn't seen very often.
Right.
And I was with a small unit. There was only 6 of us. Everybody else was of color except for me. They actually gave me the nickname "Token White Guy." In the NYPD, they find something that you don't like, and that'll end up being your nickname. So we walked into one of the precincts, and the guys asked, "Who's this guy?" I said, "Oh yeah, he's our Token White Guy," and it stuck after that. My nickname was Token. But we blend into the community. I mean, they could. I couldn't. The only way I got in, and it was by a fluke, is I was wearing one of my old field jackets one time. Got into a fight with a perp. Got up, and I had grown the hair out, grown the beard out, which I regrew now. And while I'm sitting here recovering, had a cup of chocolate, and it's actually a funny story. And some kid put money in my cup, and the guys looked at me and they started laughing, and he realized she thought I was a homeless veteran, and they're like,
Oh,
"Let's
wow.
give it a shot." And I went out there, and I actually stood in the because we were looking for somebody on 125th Street and St. Nicholas Avenue. For those of you who don't know, that's right in the center of Harlem. And I was there, and I was accepted, and it was great. I had a great experience. I had all the time we were there. We made tons of arrests. I ended up with 0 complaints from anybody, even the guys I arrested. I don't understand the color thing. I don't understand it. I don't understand why there's biases. If you treat people right, they'll treat you right. Is what I've come to find out.
Yeah.
Yep.
Jeff, you're up.
All right. We're not talking a lot as hosts today, but I am going to pontificate for a few seconds in ramping up to my question. Now, everybody here is military related, and all of our guests were law enforcement related, and it brings to mind to me that there's a gap between military culture and policing culture that seems to come up in these instances, because in the military, and let's not pretend that there's not racial bias in the military, because there is. The difference is, in the military, if you do something screwed up, there are swift and significant consequences. And what I'm seeing a lot of times, when police screw up, they get paid leave, and the union comes out and says it's a good shoot. Everybody kind of falls in line, and they go back to their job. So what I'm wondering is, with the police mimicking the military in so many ways, how do we get them to mimic the military culture of consequence out there on the street?
AJ?
Yeah, let me back up just a little bit on that statement, Jeff. That whole thing about swift consequences in the military, I'm not going to necessarily buy that 100%, my friend. And I'll tell you why. The things that people are complaining about in policing are things that my parents were complaining about in policing. The way that they were being treated when nobody was looking. when the lights weren't on, this is how people got treated. The same thing happens in the military. Now, I'm a Coast Guard veteran, and if you think that there was not, if anyone thinks, not you in particular, but if anyone thinks that there was not racism in the military, or that people mistreated people without consequences in the military, that's just not true. I mean, what we're seeing now is, for instance, in a case of sexual assault, how many women, for how long, were victimized and had no place to go, no one to talk to, and no one, even when they reported it, would do anything about it. I mean, that we know that to be true right now, because all of that is coming out. All of that information is being delivered. But what we don't do in the military is the same thing we don't do in regular society. We don't talk about racism. We don't talk about the issues that hold others back. I mean, throughout this time, one of the things that I've been proud of is to see African American leaders in the military coming forth and talking about their experiences in the military. That to me has been incredible, because the words that they have written are the same words and the same feelings that I have had in the military, outside of the military, growing up. I mean, it's like everyday life for me. And when you feel that all the time, that just seems like that's the way life is. And I know it's not supposed to be that way, but that's the experience that I'm having. Even right now, when I hear these things, yeah, it is very disheartening. But at the same time, it's like, okay, you know what? I'm not alone. So I don't know that the military is necessarily the best way to go about setting, the swift consequences part of it. And I certainly don't think that, our local police taking on a militaristic view is the way to go either. I think that's just very problematic. I had a chief who, this was 20 years ago, 25 years ago, maybe. And our agency wanted to go to those BDUs that everybody's wearing, those, well, they're BDUs, you know what BDUs are. And he wouldn't do it. And you know why he wouldn't do it? Because he said, we are not the military. That may be fine for them, but we have to work in a civilian atmosphere. People expect you to dress and act professionally. And if you don't do that, then you may not act that way. And I don't want to put you in that position. So we wore those heavy, hot wool uniforms while he was chief. And frankly, I think that was the right decision. Looking back now, I may not have liked it at the time, because it was easier to wash them things and put them right back on the next day. But I tell you what, he knew what he was talking about in that sense. I think we have to get away from necessarily comparing the military to civilian life. It's two different things, but there are similar issues that run through it all.
Jeff, I'll toss it back to you.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify. Now, if and it could be I live in the bubble of being in a Marine Corps infantry unit. We didn't have women, so I don't know any of that except for what I hear. But I will say that when there are rules of engagement with the military, and if you go to an end, and to say that you're always under attack, in the military, there are rules of engagement. If you shoot the wrong person, no matter what, there are swift and significant consequences, at least in modern day military. Yeah. And I don't see that happening on the policing side, and it troubles me.
AJ, if you want to continue on that.
Yeah, I can. And in some sense, it troubles me as well, because the way the law is written, it does tend to provide a justification for law enforcement officers to use their weapons in certain circumstances. And those circumstances are often different than what we face on a military battlefield. What I keep telling folks is this: for the vast majority of the 800,000 police officers in the United States, if you tell them what the rules are they will meet your expectation. Okay, they will follow the rules. If you change the rules, they may not like it, but they will. The vast majority of the 800,000 will follow the rules. Okay, right now, the way the law is written, well, most of these shootings come back as justified because under the law they're justified. Now, if society decides to change how that's seen, then officers will be retrained. And I expect that the vast majority of those 800,000 officers will still follow the rules. The ones that don't will get charged. And I think we're seeing that. We don't see it often, but if officers are following what the law is, then we shouldn't see it often where officers are outside of the law. Now, if the argument is all about changing the rules, that's a conversation that everybody, all the stakeholders, including the police, need to be at the table having that conversation about, because they're the ones that are going to have to go out there and put themselves in harm's way and enforce those laws. So,
Yeah, and I'll follow up. My question later on is going to deal with the qualified immunity side of that, and just go into that a little bit. But Jeff, if you got another question for Hugh, or do you want him to answer the same?
Yeah, I kind of want to answer the same bit of it, and I'm looking forward to your qualified immunity later.
Okay, Jeff, I kind of agree with you to a certain extent. Military and policing are very similar in the fact that they're when you're police, you are a quasi-military operation. You have uniforms, you have rules you follow. All these are almost the same. It's a lot of it depends on your who's in charge. As a chief of department, I'm not one of those people that say, "Oh, we look over everything." You screw up, you get things happen to you. Just like in the you have rules of engagement, right? In the military, if you and I know in Vietnam, you shot someone illegally, you went to jail. I knew guys that went to jail, right? The same thing can happen in the police force. However, I want you to think about how many policemen out there, and if you think about it this way, let me change it. How many people ride motors? You ride motorcycle? How many people ride motorcycles out there?
I
Right?
used to.
You have all these motorcycle riders out there, but you have 1%ers. What are the 1%ers? Those are your outlaw. Those are your outlaw motorcycle riders, right? They're the ones that don't follow any rules. In every profession, you have that same thing. You have those 1%ers. And either they're not going to follow them, or they're going to use the rules against the way society's norms are. They say, this is the way I want it to be, and that's what they do. So if you look at that, and yes, and like you said, there are a lot of things happen now that didn't happen back when my day. We didn't have females. We didn't have any women in my units and things like that. However, one of the things I do is I teach a class on combat trauma. And the trauma is, what do you do when you have a female who's gone to combat, been shot at just like you have, right? And she's going through PTSD, right? And so now what happens when she has to go to therapy? And she's been sexually abused by her NCOIC. And she can't say anything because she's going to be ostracized by her entire unit, right? And that can happen in the military, and that can happen in the police force.
mm-hmm.
So you can't say that. You can't really separate the two, because both of them, you have those depending on what the people on top and how they're doing. And let's be honest with you, I don't know any way to say it. You've got old white men here. You got old white men here a lot of times. Although you've got more, you're getting more people of color, and I'm not just talking about black and African Americans. I mean people of color that are being chiefs, but still they bring their biases and prejudice with them. Everybody, excuse my expression, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, has a prejudice in this world. You, Jeff, every one of us have I have a prejudice against people who steal from other people. I do not like them, and I think they're using air somebody else can use to breathe. But that's my bias and my prejudice. Just like I have that, there are people that have those same prejudice for race. They should not be in that position. Yes, I agree with you. And to say that nothing is done, that's necessarily true. But if I have a bias, I don't like females, let's say, in my department, and I had my I'll say other chiefs that didn't particularly like females, right? I had a female assistant chief. There you go. And so, I mean, because she was the person with the most experience and the best person for that job. But there are people who did not like that. So what do you do with that?
Yeah.
So that you have to all that is all considered all together.
Sean, if you want to weigh in on the same question,
go ahead, Sean.
Autry, we can hear you typing there. By the way, if you want to,
yeah.
Sorry,
sorry. I was reaching out to one of our hosts there.
Yeah. Sean, you're up.
Well, I've seen it more on like what these two gentlemen pointed out perfectly. I mean, AJ said it perfectly. I do peer counseling, and I do it for cops. You know, NYPD. There's an organization called Police Officers Providing Peer Assistance, and since 2003, we've reached out to veterans. Obviously, me being a veteran, and since I'm retired, I get the phone calls all the time, and I see more trauma on the sexual side with women in the military than they do in the police department. And the stories are horrible. How it's been covered up, and this is recently. This isn't back in the 80s. This isn't back in the 90s. This is today, and it's all covered up. It's swept under the rug. In the NYPD, I can't speak for all other police departments, and I can only say what I've experienced, what I've seen. In the NYPD, if that ever comes out, they're going after the guys that day. They're calling them in off of work. I've seen a guy called in off of vacation when you're not supposed to touch him. Called in off vacation, said, "You answer to this right now, right here," and that's it. Where, the other side of the military, I'm not in the military now, but through the counseling, the peer counseling with these women, it's not being done. It's not being done the same way.
Yeah, Jeff, did you want to wrap that up in any way, or?
Well, I did. I mean, it's first of all, we're not at the end of the show, but I want to thank all of you for the perspectives that you give me from different from different points of view around this, and I'm just so grateful for this, and I'm so grateful that we're getting this conversation sparked in the military community, because it really troubled me. There was a Task and Purpose article, I think we talked about it before, that says that veterans organizations aren't talking about this. And right now, the American Legion is, and I'm really appreciative of that.
Ashley, this is absolutely the longest you've ever been without talking, isn't it?
What happens if I say yes?
She's like a coiled tiger. Everybody get ready. All right, Ashley, you're up.
So I just want to take a moment and just kind of, with the last just responses from Jeff's questions, I appreciate you bringing into the conversation some of the sexist attitudes that are out there surrounding both women in service and just women in general in leadership positions. My background is military police. I was an NCO, and I'm unfortunately a statistic of military sexual trauma. And I know exactly what it feels like to be fear of retaliation, to have served alongside one of my rapists for 5 years, and to do my job and do my job well. And to still to this day be fighting for that validation even through claim process. So I understand, for all the women that are out there that are listening, I feel you, and I empathize on such a deep level, and I'm really glad that we're having the conversation. And in the overarching, I know many women and many women of color who have this issue in the service, who are fearful. I know we have a young lady out there right now who's missing out of Fort Hood with similar sexual allegations, and to the big picture of this, it's really important that we're having this conversation. I I wanted to dive a little bit deeper into police, and I wanted to talk a little bit about the war on drugs. I've taken a reasonable amount of time to, watch different documentaries. I recently watched the Rodney King documentary that's on Netflix, and I also watched another in regards to 13, or I believe it's 13. I think it's just 13. That's what it's referred to as, and it goes into about incarceration and the increase in incarceration. If I'm not mistaken, there's over 2 million people incarcerated. This is first world country, and where you have more people incarcerated than whatever value you want to stick next to that. And unfortunately, if I'm not mistaken, and remind me of the timeline, but right after the Rodney King, everything that happened there was the LA riots. I know Clinton came into administration. They did the war on drugs, and there was this huge volume of folks that were now being incarcerated. And unfortunately, a lot of them were Black and minority. And I think that we have missed a huge gap in leadership because of just the slew of issues that come with incarceration. And I wanted to get your perspective on, how incarceration and policing and all of those kind of combinational items have kind of set the tone for today's climate.
Autrey, we'll start with you again.
Yeah, I come at it from the perspective of that, frankly, I hated the war on drugs. I was a cop in '85 is when I first became a sworn law enforcement officer. Before that, I was working in police departments. And the war on drugs, from my perspective, was really a war on communities of color. And that's just, again, this is my perspective. Others may feel differently, and that's fine, and I accept that. But what happened as a result of the war on drugs is that, particularly say in my particular communities, African-American communities, many of the men were taken out of the homes, incarcerated, and kids were left to grow up without any father figures. What does that do to our society when you don't have somebody there who can teach you the right way? We face enough challenges on our own, but when we create this so-called war against drugs, it's really a war against civilians in our communities. And it was wrong. I to this day, I hate drug cases. Anybody who's ever seen me, know me, dealt with me in court knows I hate drug cases. I've never, ever tried a drug case because I hate them that much. Okay. So that's the perspective I come from, because I've seen what it's done to my community. I've seen what it's done to places like East Oakland, where I grew up, or in Detroit, Michigan, or in New Orleans. I've seen exactly what the outcome of the war on drugs was, and I'm still not happy about it. So, that's how I view it. I am happy that we're talking about reform and getting some of these folks who have been locked up for years and years over drug cases out. Drugs are a scourge on our society, but we have to find a different way to deal with that rather than just locking everybody up.
Yeah,
Ashley, did you want to follow up on that, Ashley?
Absolutely. My background is in public health, and I've done quite a lengthy amount of research and studying, not only in communities that have been affected by, for example, opioid crisis or cocaine, heroin, all the above. And I'm always really shocked and awed that we criminalize substance abuses. And instead of making it a public health problem, right? Just as right now in the COVID pandemic, we are now concerned with washing our hands, social distancing, all of the above. That is a public health response, and we should have had a public health response to this as a start. And I want to echo the question on to our other interviewees. So, how do you feel about this situation? How with either criminal reform, the situation that has happened and such. I mean, we're talking huge timeline here, but
Okay.
Yeah, we'll go to Hugh in a second. I think Autrey wanted to weigh in on something real quick.
Yeah, I want to add one more thing to that. I think I have to give the disclaimer because I actually, one of the last supervisory roles I had in the police department, unfortunately, was in the narcotics unit. So as much as I hated that, that was a role that I was assigned to. And I tried to do everything I could to steer us away from low-level users, stay away from them, and worry about the individuals who were bringing narcotics into the community. That's what I wanted our unit to focus on. So I wanted to make sure that anybody who knows me knows I'm not trying to be hypocritical here. I hated that was not my favorite assignment, but I did my job. So,
Hugh, you're up.
I just think it's really strange having to be a child. I grew up in the 50s and the 60s. You guys weren't even thought of during that time. And when I was in high school, you know, one of the things we used to all say? We'd say, the government, why are they criminalizing marijuana? Why don't we tax it? How much money could be made by taxing it? Well, how many years did it take for us to finally decriminalize to a certain extent and start taxing it? Why did it take so long? And what about all those people, just like Autrey says, that were put and incarcerated behind a joint or two, and their whole lives totally ruined? You know, I mean, okay, I grew up in Watts. Now, but you have to understand that's a bad, everyone goes, oh my God. But when I grew up there in the 50s and the 60s, it was a middle class, diverse neighborhood. On my block, there was every single ethnicity you can name. There were Japanese, there were Hispanics, there were African Americans, there were white, there was everybody, right? And you had families there. But when, as it said, as the war on drugs progressed, fathers started disappearing. People are being raised without one-parent homes. That's not acceptable, especially if, what do you expect to happen? And I'm just not talking about, I'd almost just say people of color, because I'm not just talking about African Americans, I'm talking about a whole lot of other people. What do you think's happening to their families? How are they going to survive? And just think about what the things that they have to do now to be able to survive. And just like Ashley said, it should have been and should be more of a public health thing in a lot of ways. Now, I'm not going to tell you that I'm all for it. That doesn't make it sound like I'm all for drugs and drugs. No, that is not. I'm sorry. I was still a cop. You know, I can't. You know, there's a lot of things I don't. I mean, I've never taken drugs. I'll be honest with you. I have no desire to take drugs. But that's me. You might want to. That's your choice. If it's legal, more power to you. You know, but you know what? There's a lot of things we can decriminalize, and all we did was make, as far as I was concerned, and I look at it now, we made a whole bunch of folks wealthy in Central and South America. Very, very. I mean, face it. How many billionaires are there in Colombia? Okay, I'm safe. I'm off my soapbox. Go ahead.
It's good soapbox, Hugh.
I thought that you brought up a really good point, and one of the things that I recall studying is as family structure, and I studied a lot of military families and studying the deconstruction of family due to the absence of a key parental figure is just something that's always stuck on in my mind when I'm looking at different research, and as we discuss and go over more about just like reform and police, it's just, I want the audience to understand that like there is a lot of really excellent research out there on the development and structures of family, community wellness, socioeconomic disadvantaged communities. Like there's a lot of research and information out there. And I don't think that this is something new. People have been researching and studying this. I mean, we can even go back to red line laws that, you know, prohibited African Americans from receiving or being eligible for loans to move into what we refer to as white suburbia. I think it was Levittown. I remember reading research in regards to that and articles stating that, these policies and these laws, and I think this kind of rolls into our next interview, because, we go into the law, we look at policy, we look at procedure. It's how do we break some of those chains on some of those issues longstanding.
Sean, before we go to you, it looks like Hugh wants to weigh in real quick.
Real quick, I'm just going to add on what Ashley said. A lot of what we are seeing and what we have done is a result of what's happened in the past. We of the American Legion are not above. I'm going to explain in California what many of you don't know is we actually had a district in the southern part of California that was established for one reason. You know why? To keep all posts of color in Southern California in one place. And this was written in our departmental bylaws in the 30s. The only reason I found out about it because the district said, well, we want to know what our geographical boundaries were. And when we pulled it, we said, you really don't, because this is illegal as hell. You cannot do this. And they actually wrote this. They said, all posts of color will be within these boundaries, within this area, period. So yes, I mean, it's there. And we have to be aware and not let that happen again in the future.
Does that still exist, or has that been?
No,
that's been disbanded, right? Okay.
No.
I just want to make sure for our audience, for our viewers or
no,
listeners that
we
don't know.
took it
Yes,
out.
it's gone.
It was. Like I said, the only reason it came up, and we didn't even realize it, but what happened was we had a judge advocate that was looking at boundaries for a particular district. And the district was saying they had a new post, and they said, well, this should be in what district should it be in? And when he looked up the original boundaries for districts, this was it.
You're muted.
Oh no.
Looks like we lost Hugh there. I don't know what happened. We'll get Hugh back online here in a second. But Ashley, if you wanted to re-ask your question or refocus it to Sean.
Absolutely.
Sorry about
he looked so passionate on video for all of our listeners. He was like getting into it, getting close to the camera. So to reframe, I know your background. I want to hear your opinion in regards to policy, procedure, things that systematically have affected this long overdue conversation of racism, sexism, and things that you see within your boundaries.
Okay, I thought we were still going with the war on drugs. That's why.
Yeah, I mean, all within
right.
the scope. It's all within the scope. War on drugs. You answer whatever question you want.
That's what I was jumping
We're touching on all kinds of important things right now, so whatever is applicable to you. Well,
just to get to the war on drugs, I mean, you had two great answers before I got in there, and I love both of them. Now, one of the things that I'm also on the American Legion's National PTSD TBI committee because the peer counseling that I do and all that stuff. We put through that we wanted testing of marijuana because apparently Israel did this, but we wanted the testing to be done here, and it's not being done appropriately because the U.S. government isn't giving the proper plants to test. They're getting stems and seed, and we had one of the this doctor came in and she explained it all to us, and the American Legion came out with a resolution. We want this tested. If it works, we want to use it for our veterans coming back. If this works for PTSD, we want that. Now, with that, being a cop, and again, I'll reiterate this: I have never smoked a joint in my life. Mm-hmm. I've never taken anything except prescription drugs. That's just that's just me. But I've seen people who smoke marijuana. I live in New York. And, was a cop in Manhattan for a long time. I would rather arrest a guy who's high on marijuana than a guy who's drinking. The guy who's drinking, he wants to fight you. I mean, you get in some awful, awful, awful fights. You get a guy who's smoking weed and he just wants a pizza. And you don't agree with it. You get him back in. You say, you get the guy who's drunk driver who just ran into four cars, going destroyed 4 cars. You get him out. Now he wants to fight you. The guy's 5'7", 150 pounds, and he wants to take me on, and I'm a little bigger than normal. And then you get the guy who's high, and he's like, he does something that causes us to arrest him, and he's very compliant, very complacent. Hey, the other drugs, and again, throwing marijuana off to the side, throwing that off to the side. The other drugs I have a problem with is if they're killing people, they're non-regulated. I mean, they're putting fentanyl in some of these drugs, and that's killing people like that. Jump onto that. If the government regulated it, if it was put in a certain thing, like, I don't know, maybe do like what Amsterdam does. You want to do it, go ahead and do it, but this is where you have to do it. I don't know. We talk about the drug pusher. That's who I would want to go after. The people who are taking the drugs, I believe more in helping them than incarcerating them. I think, all right, you're arrested, you have these drugs on you. Okay, you have to go to a mandatory drug rehabilitation place. We're going to put you there. Now, if you committed a crime along with being higher on drugs, then you got to deal with the crime. But if it's drugs alone, put them in a mandatory place where they can dry out, get the help they need. Just throwing somebody, in jail for that, I don't see it.
All right, everybody, thanks for joining us here at the Tango Alpha Lima podcast. We hope you've enjoyed what's been a pretty rewarding and large topic for us. We've decided to break this into 2 sections. So the second section will be coming to you shortly, but we would encourage you to go and review us and to follow us wherever you listen to your podcast. If you're watching this on YouTube, be sure to like us on YouTube. And if you have any feedback for anything we've discussed here, please just leave it in the comments. All we ask you, be respectful, and we will take that advice and see what we can do and see if we can do a better job in the future. But for now, hope you've enjoyed this, and we look forward to you listening to part 2.